October is the month of Halloween, and Halloween is the holiday that celebrates the darker, spookier, frightening part of the human culture. So rather than pick any old game off my shelf, I instead tried something a little different this month. I handpicked a carefully curated list of games for me to play this month. Games that could be described, in some way or another, as horror games. To start off, let's look at a very particular game that used to scare me as a child. Now, it may not be considered all that scary anymore, but I still can't erase the feelings I had for it when I was young. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Talon 4.
Some people may already be preemptively typing comments that read something along the lines of complaints that Metroid isn't a horror series. Now, I disagree. I absolutely believe Metroid can be classified as horror. I may not find the games scary anymore, but they are games all about atmosphere, isolation, and survival. It definitely uses those elements to attempt to pull fear out of its players. Just because Samus is capable, it doesn't mean the situation is any less scary. Absolutely the definition of horror in my book. But anyway, why Metroid Prime? Well, if you can manage to believe this, before the month of October 2020, I had never actually finished a Metroid game before. I know, silly, isn't it? I've played many Metroidvania titles, I've even played most of the Metroid games, but I've never finished any of them. Considering that Metroid Prime is the first Metroid game I had ever played, and considering that it's also a game that scared me as a child, I felt there was no better way to start the month than for me to play it. As it turns out, I really enjoyed it. 10 out of 10 piece of art, a masterpiece. Phenomenal game to play even today. While I've certainly been coming around on the game design of Metroid within the past few years, there was something about this particular playthrough where the pieces finally clicked in place for me. Now, I really don't want to drone on about the 2 bingo card words in a YouTube video that talks about Metroid, but to be completely sincere, there's no other game that can make me feel so engrossed into the role of the character than when I'm playing Samus in Prime. The TV screen is quite literally the only barrier between you the player and Samus the character. All the other elements in the game world are completely diegetic and will shift on your circumstances. I haven't played any games since that put as much consideration into the interactivity design quite like this game. Every moment in my journey with Metroid Prime was sublime, and well, I feel like I have a new series to catch up with.
So maybe Metroid Prime isn't really all that scary anymore, but it was still rather enjoyable. Even still, I think we should just cool down a little bit. I want to play something that could be considered horror, but maybe not explicitly dreadful. Perhaps then we should take a trip to one of my favorite video game series, to try out an entry which I have yet to play.
Now, Yakuza Dead Souls is a fascinating game. Despite being a non-canon spin-off title, it retains the elements that make a Yakuza game what it is. It's got the gripping story presentation, the compact open world, and the silly side stories that help break up the intensity. If it weren't for the unrealistic circumstance of the apocalypse, you'd never be able to tell this was just a throwaway title, considering the production values seemingly haven't changed at all. What sets Dead Souls apart is that it just really runs with the idea of spinning off the main series. The open world of Kamurocho isn't quite as open as it used to be. The inside of the city gets walled off to contain the zombie outbreak, and our main heroes head inside to thin the numbers. The melee combat of the previous games isn't enough to keep the opposition down. This time, every playable character gets armed to the teeth with different kinds of firearms. That's right, we have a Yakuza shooter, and oh boy, the combat is awful. It's just so bad. Dead Souls is the result of a game trying to be a shooter within a game engine that was not built for ranged combat. Manual aiming is just so sensitive that it sometimes feels less precise than aiming from the hip. And when I do aim from the hip, my camera may not be focused on the action to get the satisfying feedback I need when I'm mowing down zombies. When you get a handle for how the controls function, you can gunsling headshots left and right like a wild desperado. But even if you do, it's only for subpar combat rounds that just get tiring. Unless you're playing as Ryuji Goda and his Barrett Wallace-ass Gatling gun arm. That is admittedly pretty fun. Even the regular Yakuza elements fans have come to expect from these games feel so much more tedious to get through. You can't just walk to a destination. You have to walk all the way around the quarantine zone to get to the place you need to be, when in other games it would have just been a near straight shot down Taihei Boulevard. If you need to resupply at the pharmacy, then you'd have to go through the process of going into the quarantine zone, then clearing out the shop of zombies, make your purchase, then go back out into the designated entrance by yourself with all of these loading screens to show for it. Overall, this is the worst Yakuza game I've ever played. Which, to be fair, isn't the damning slight against the game that it might sound like. Like, the Yakuza series is just that insanely good, where I can say some game is the worst in the series, and all that means is that it's just a different take on the style that's interesting in its own right. But in the end, I'm with the general opinion on this one. I find it to be a rather miserable game to get through. Fun for what it is, but not enjoyable enough for me to recommend others play it.
But that's enough of that. Maybe we need to start working our way back up to pure horror, but let's find a few stepping stones in the process. Maybe one where we're going in and out of the fold, unraveling a mysterious story. One where our main character is an off-the-edge investigator that gets deadly premonitions of his future.
Deadly Premonition is a game I cannot accurately describe the story of with just words. I could say this game is about an outsider coming into a small town to investigate a serial murder case. But that's a fairly normal fictional premise that can describe a whole host of games, not even specifically horror titles. I could say that it's got an incredibly weird undertone that permeates through the whole experience. But there are other games out there that are just as weird, some even more explicitly so. I could say that this game is severely underdeveloped, and the result is a buggy and unpolished game where the movement feels sluggish, the driving too sensitive, the gunplay only average at best, among many other problems. But I think that also runs under the assumption that those things would make this game worse. The only way someone can truly understand is by playing it for themselves. Only then can you realize just how much there is to take away from this game. The more I talk about Deadly Premonition, the more I spoil for this game. And if you are at all interested in playing something intense, surreal, and messy, then you deserve to try out Deadly Premonition as blind as you can possibly be. Behind all the janky, underdeveloped design is actually a surprisingly compelling game, with an unironically incredible story that goes places I would have never expected itself to take.
Now that was certainly a little weird. Definitely more scary than the last two games. But I think I need something I can take just a little more seriously. Now I'm not as accustomed to horror, but I love JRPGs. Maybe what I need is a game that can help me bridge the gap between the two.
When the words Parasite Eve first crept onto my ears, I heard it described as Resident Evil mixed with Final Fantasy. The combination sounded too bizarre for me not to be curious. To my surprise, the game was exactly how it was described. The exploration is exactly how a Resident Evil game functions, until the random encounter gods then grace the player with a battle system, complete with the familiar ATB bar from Final Fantasy. Now the problem is that this game is something I just can't get invested in. The game is just so awkward to play. While I don't outright hate it, it's just too sloppy for me to enjoy. I like the idea of the battle system, but I think that part of the game fumbles too. You can move freely around the battlefield to position yourself to be in range of your firearms, or evade oncoming attacks. It's not as simple as it sounds. Aya moves like she's ankle deep in a pond of water, yet the enemy attacks feel like a speeding bullet in comparison. It feels like I take forever just to get from one side of the screen to the other. By the time I process the information that decides I should get out of there, I'm already taking damage. The game is pretty generous with healing opportunities, but it's like giving me bandages instead of addressing the thing that's getting me hurt in the first place. Overall, I walked away from Parasite Eve a little disappointed. I haven't finished the game, and I don't think I will. I wasn't thrilled to see how the combat evolved, and I didn't feel much stake in the story being told. How ironic, the game seemingly most tailor-made to my tastes ended up being the game I enjoyed the least.
You know, one thing I've noticed about all the games I played this month is that they're really not all that scary. I mean, maybe I'm just horror tolerant, but I don't know, maybe I'm looking in the wrong place. Maybe what I need is just something that I can get a little more immersed with.
Resident Evil is a series I haven't really done a good job of catching up with. I mean, I've had this copy of Resident Evil 7 for years, and I've barely touched it. I was able to watch multiple people play through this game for myself when it came out, so I knew pretty much how the game went down.
It's for that reason I never really played Resident Evil 7. I mean, it's not like I could experience and play the game in a new way for myself, right? Well, maybe I can.
The thing you need to know about Resident Evil 7 in VR is that it's Resident Evil 7, but in VR. That's really all there is to it. It's not some separate mode or minigame loosely based on the setting. No, every inch of content in this game is absolutely compatible with the PlayStation VR. The game becomes way more alive and detailed in VR, despite the resolution and texture quality hits the game takes. There were so many little things I just never really noticed about my surroundings, or that I never really thought about how the house was put together. The cracked drywall and floorboards, contents of drawers throughout the house, all of these things I just kind of mentally blocked out before, or didn't notice. But a lot of that became very apparent when I was seeing it for myself. Oh my god, this is disgusting! They don't even have milk! And, well, being immersed in the game, the scares hit a little harder. Whenever I got threatened with knives or axes, I would physically reel back my head. I know all this stuff is coming, and I know it's all scripted, but it really is something else. If you thought Jack Baker chasing you around was already horrifying, oh my goodness, it's something else in VR. Even the grossness hits a little harder. I already didn't like going down into this basement water section, and oh boy, it's worse when you're practically eye level to it. Getting up close and personal with these details more than made me a little unsettled. But some of those scripted moments will lose their edge in this version of the game. Also disorienting is the game will fade out whenever it needs to reposition the camera. Obviously, this is to not cause severe motion sickness by jolting the viewpoint unexpectedly, but it took me out of the game. This is not mentioning that whenever the game has a pre-rendered cutscene, you'll load into what looks like watching a big screen in a movie theater. Overall, playing Resident Evil 7 in VR is something you'll probably only do just as a novelty. I was completely ready to write it off as such after my first session. The overall execution isn't nearly as strong as playing it normally. I cannot recommend seeking this experience out unless you've already played this game before, or otherwise familiar with it. It's something that's worth checking out if you happen to have a PlayStation VR and also happen to have Resident Evil 7 on PlayStation 4. But I'll completely admit something I wasn't really expecting to say. I actually really enjoy playing the game in this way. Once you get used to some VR growing pains, it's incredibly apparent how great the format is for this game. From the way I interacted with my environment and was able to take advantage of the benefits of playing with the headsets, in a weird way, I can't imagine playing this game without VR. Getting right up into that monster's face and blasting that shotgun? Absolutely exhilarating. Having a ridiculous chainsaw duel? Undoubtedly VR enhanced. Punching the ever-loving crap out of everything as Joe Baker? That just explains itself. Like I said before, this is something you'll only truly experience if you have the ability to do so, but if you can experience RE7 in this way, then you really should. If I felt like my October was a little lacking in spooky experiences, this game certainly fulfilled that in spades.
Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. I've certainly got my horror quota filled in for the year, and I hope you enjoyed what you watched. But next month is going to be November. The craziest time of the year, some say, when all these games are releasing, all these different people talking and playing them, and all that jazz, and I'm not going to have time to play all of them. I'm not going to have the money to, either. So, yeah, I'll just do what I do. I'm going to go with my heart, and I think I got most of my rest of the year planned out already. So, in the meantime, let's see what the internet has to say. Okay.
Huh? Wow. Nintendo's going to be localizing the original Fire Emblem 1 for the 30th anniversary? Well, that's odd. When I said earlier in the year that if a new Fire Emblem game came out this year, I would get it. Needless to say, I didn't think it'd be an old Fire Emblem game. Color me intrigued, though. Huh? What's this? Limited edition for the game? That looks really neat. $50, though. Huh.
Okay, I know what you guys are thinking, but, like, take a moment to realize how ridiculous this is. I mean, it's not like this is even a new game that's coming out. I've played this game before, on this laptop, even. Do you really think I'd blow 50 of my budget dollars on something like...